Yeah, and that's a very good point. And I mean, I think when people like ask like why the heck would you invest or invest in Bitcoin, like it's just like this speculative thing. I like to like walk people through of like, okay, let's like walk through all the options of like what I could invest in. So like I'll kind of like.
All right, Assalamu alaikum and welcome everyone to another episode of TakaTalks. Today we have with us a very special guest. His name is Abdullah, but he is known as the Muslim Bitcoiner on Twitter, where he tweets and writes about the intersection of Islam and Bitcoin. He is a co-founder of Bitcoin Majlis, which is an education platform that helps Muslims understand the halal case for Bitcoin from a sound money perspective. He also runs the Muslim Bitcoiner podcast, where he interviews Muslims in the Bitcoin space. So, welcome, Abdullah. I know it's late for you, so thank you for joining us this evening or tonight for you. And tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So, yeah, just to introduce my name is Abdullah, and I guess just to kind of give some background, I started down like I guess my Bitcoin journey with I think I've told the story a few times now, but I've my older brother was kind of the one that had a very profound role on my education or my journey into Bitcoin. So like he's been talking about this Bitcoin thing since like 2013, and I just kept ignoring him, and he even got me to mess around with some wallets like back in 2017 or whatever, and there was like the whole Bitcoin Cash fork thing, and he was like, "Here, you got to sell these, and then buy more Bitcoin." So he was like showing me this, but I didn't really like understand Bitcoin. It wasn't until 2019 when my brother got me a copy of the Bitcoin Standard, which the famous book written by Saifuddin Ammous. And once I read that book, that's kind of like when it started, like light bulbs started going off, and I started kind of like it was a very good introduction to Bitcoin because most of the book talks about money and it talks about economics, like from that kind of perspective. And after I read the Bitcoin Standard, I started kind of like reading other books from other people within the Bitcoin space. But as I was kind of going down this rabbit hole, my older brother made it very clear. He was like, only focus on Bitcoin. Don't bother with like all of this other stuff that's going on right now. Just focus on Bitcoin, and that's what you should be learning about, and that's like where the innovation actually is. So I didn't bother like questioning that because he was. I already admitted that he was right about Bitcoin the whole time, so I was like, all right, I'll just take your word for it, and I'll just keep going and plowing through, all of these videos and podcasts and books and articles and stuff that he would send me. So it wasn't until I think it was in 2021. So yeah, like two years ago or so, I heard this podcast, Saifuddin's Bitcoin Standard podcast. He was talking with this Islamic banker guy. His name is Haris Irfan, and I think the title of the episode was called "Bitcoin: The Most Islamic Form of Money." It's a really really great episode, and it's from obviously like an Islamic finance perspective. But he started making the case that like, hey, this Bitcoin thing actually is in line with Sharia compared to like fiat, and even compared to like other monies historically speaking. And it kind of like started making me like go down the rabbit hole even more because I was it started filling me up with all of these ideas. And my older brother's like, hey, you should make a Twitter account and follow all of these people or whatever. So I make a Twitter account, and I started like realizing that the kind of discourse around Bitcoin among Muslims isn't really as it wasn't as developed as I thought it would be. So that's when I started like I wrote a few articles on my Medium page, and then people like started really liking it. And I guess that's kind of like I just started posting more on Twitter and started posting like quotes and stuff that I would read from books, and I guess people really liked it. And next thing you know, like I didn't realize that like I'd have such a presence on online talking about this stuff. And then I guess that's kind of stuff happened where I would go to Bitcoin conferences and meet up with these people, and I started a podcast. And recently, my brother and I started Bitcoin Majlis, which is an education-based platform to kind of educate Muslims about the halal case for Bitcoin. And yeah, that's kind of like how I got to where I am right now. Is speaking, I guess, like from the Bitcoin perspective.
Just a bit of context. So you live in the United States?
Yeah. I live in the U.S. My father is originally from Palestine, and but I've lived here in the U.S. Through most of my life.
Thank you. So I think many of us were orange pilled by Saifuddin Ammous. I was also one of those who started listening to his podcast and then went on to read his books, and I was just convinced, right? And I think the thing that got me when I first read the Bitcoin Standard was the description of what money actually is. And in fact, it is something that is where there's some kind of social agreement. If we all agree this thing can be used as a medium of exchange, then it can be used as a medium of exchange. So one of the pushback among the Muslim community and some of the scholars as well is that money needs to be backed by something in order for it to be money. And how does this apply in the context of Bitcoin, which in theory is not backed by something?
Yeah, I think that's definitely like one of the questions even I had, when I was looking into Bitcoin, it's like one of the things ask is like what gives this thing value? Like why is the price of each of this, like why is this digital things has such a high market cap or whatever? I think it helps to figure out. So this is where understanding what gold how how what gold is and its role of money and how gold got monetized, I think kind of helps answer that question, because I like to apply whatever kind of questions you have to Bitcoin and apply it to gold. So you're like, all right, what backs gold? And whenever you ask that question, it just seems like such a weird question to ask, like what backs gold? But gold is the thing that backs itself. So applying that kind of same logic, you could also apply that to Bitcoin. Well, like Bitcoin is the thing that backs itself, and then you start asking other questions of like, all right, well, where does the value come from? And that kind of gets into one of the things I like to complain about on Twitter is that, like, one of the things that a lot of Muslims and scholars talk about with Bitcoin is like, oh well, Bitcoin doesn't have any intrinsic value, so like it's not like worth anything. So this is where like I really like, I guess whenever people start learning about Bitcoin, I like them to start learning about economics, because I really feel like that's a key component that a lot of, especially like scholars, will kind of gloss over when trying to understand Bitcoin. I feel like they focus so much on the tech side that they don't bother like understanding things like, what value is, or how like value comes about. And they just kind of focus on this like thing, this Bitcoin is digital and it's not tangible, and it supposedly like doesn't have intrinsic value, and they just kind of like already had their conclusion already thought out. But I guess to kind of answer the question of like what backs Bitcoin, well, it's if you look at gold, the thing that backs gold are its inherent monetary properties. And this is why I like to talk about money in terms of its properties. Like you need to have certain properties that you would want in a money. Consider, 'cause especially stuff like scarcity, durability, portability, fungibility. All of these properties are important with gold, and they also apply to Bitcoin. So like the reason why gold is valuable, or why like it's the thing that backs, is because of its incredible monetary properties. And these things can also be applied to Bitcoin as well. I think there's also this misconception that like a thing that is used as a medium of exchange necessarily has to have a non-monetary use. So like it's easy for people to look at gold and they say, oh, well, it's gold is backed because people demand it for other non-monetary uses. But people don't buy gold because someone might use it for jewelry in the future. People hold on to gold because of its monetary properties, because they know people aren't going to be able to produce more of it. That's why, like, you would want to hold on to gold because it has sound monetary properties. And the same thing can be applied to Bitcoin, except in Bitcoin's case, it has. I feel like it has superior monetary properties compared to gold. The one thing that Bitcoin obviously doesn't have is that it doesn't have that established history that gold and silver have. But in terms of especially um, scarcity, durability, and especially portability, I think that's like where Bitcoin shines compared to gold.
Can you just elaborate a little bit on those monetary properties for the
Yeah.
benefit of somebody who's never heard about these things before?
For sure. So in terms of monetary properties, you want your money to have certain characteristics. So like the first thing is, very easy to explain, is scarcity. So if you have a money that's like very easy to produce, that's kind of considered a soft money. And one of the things that you learn about when reading the Bitcoin Standard is that civilizations can't really insulate themselves from using from other societies that use harder money. So like if you're a society that uses like, something like shells or beads or whatever, and you have other societies that use gold and silver, those other societies that use gold and silver are going to overtake those other societies that use shells and beads. So I think, and that's because for shells and beads it's very easy to produce a lot of compared to like gold and silver. So scarcity is really important. I guess we could talk about durability. You want your money to be able to last for hundreds of years or thousands of years. The better durability the money has, the better. I also mentioned fungibility. So fungibility is kind of is a little harder to explain, but fungibility is basically where you want to make sure each unit of the money is the same. So you don't want to have like 1 ounce of money that's different from another ounce of money. You want them to have you want them to be interchangeable and have the same characteristics. And also another one that I talked about
It's like
is
saying the seashell has to be exactly the same size.
right, exactly. So seashells and beads could work with fungibility, but sometimes you may have a bead or a shell that's higher quality, and so it does have some qualities of being fungible, but not perfect, obviously. And another important one is divisibility. So one of the problems with gold is that it's not very divisible when it comes to day-to-day transactions, especially when you're trying to move it over short or long distances. You want to be able to have you want to be able to buy things that don't have a high value. You you don't you want to be able to divide them into smaller pieces, and that's the thing that gold doesn't really do too well at, and that's why I think actually the gold's lack of divisibility and especially its lack of portability kind of lends itself to being centralized over time, to where people don't even bother transacting with the gold or silver. They just kind of get centralized over time, where bankers take control over it, where they would issue notes against it, where it would be easier to transact in it because notes are are more divisible than actual gold metal. And so those are some. I think there are some other properties that I didn't mention, but again, this is when you're trying to figure out like what makes like what backs Bitcoin. I like to look at the properties of the money and evaluate it based off of that.
So if I understand, I mean, to break it down for a layman, one of the attributes of the gold is also the ability to hold it in your hand, touch it. So there's this kind of feeling that I own something and stuff. When it comes to digital, which is actually strange because I'm not able to touch my money in the bank, still digital. But still, when you talk to laymen about Bitcoin, they're like, "But I cannot touch it." But can you do the same thing with your own money at the bank now? I mean, can you? And then they realize, oh, okay. So it's kind of interesting to see that there's still this kind of appeal where you feel that in comparison to gold, Bitcoin is not something that you can hold in your hand. And that's why I think the older generation, I would say, we are not too much tech savvy, are still like lacking the understanding of what is behind this asset class now, that most of the people are saying that khalas, this now we recognize this as an asset class. And you see now even in a way of is also like you're able to buy product even now in I think in Switzerland there's 2 cities, Zug and the other city I forgot the name, where you can literally buy with your own Bitcoin, with fraction of your Bitcoin. So there's another utility now. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
my two
Yeah,
cents on
I think that's kind of what throws people off is that Bitcoin itself is digital or it's just information. So like and that kind of gets at another subject where um you know people will kind of dismiss Bitcoin because it's digital and therefore it like has no value, but they will like make these claims on social media that is arguably just like a protocol that they use that's also information, that's also obviously giving them lots of value because they can make such short-sighted comments. But I think that's why it helps to kind of look at money as a technology or money as a protocol or a ledger. Like even when you are using gold or silver, you're still kind of participating in a ledger and trying to keep track of who owns what. And I think it kind of helps to look at money as a technology, and especially when you look at the history of how money developed as a technology. It doesn't seem that far fetched that we would go into something like Bitcoin, where you have like absolute digital scarcity, and you have like kind of this consensus of like everyone just kind of agrees upon this set of rules that just can't be changed. So I think that's also another thing that's really like hard when trying to understand not just Bitcoin but also money in general. And I think it kind of helps to kind of look at it more from a ledger perspective.
Yeah, that is very cool. It's very interesting that we actually compare Bitcoin to gold a lot. But actually, Bitcoin is a superior form of money, and I know this because we actually did buy some gold earlier this year. We were in Singapore and we bought some gold coins, and it was really as a sort of a store of value, as well as it's a bit of a souvenir. And when we we traveled back to Saudi Arabia, and as we were crossing the border, they actually stopped us. They were like,
Mm.
it was packed in our carry-on luggages and everything, and it passes through the scanner. And they stopped us. They were like, "Why do you have this gold with you?" And we're like, we're just buying gold like everybody buys gold. And they're like, "No, you have to declare it." And it was not high value, by the way. It was like relatively small pieces of but yes, pure gold nonetheless. You have to declare it, you have to tell us who owns it, you have to pay taxes on it. And we're like, whoa, 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 I thought gold was something that was still a tangible form of money, quote unquote, where a store of value that is more or less free in a sense, right? Because it's not tied to any one institution. But that's not the case anymore. If you try to move gold around, even small amounts of gold, they're gonna stop you. And this is the thing which I'm like, well, yeah, I think Bitcoin is superior.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. And I mean, I think when people like ask like why the heck would you invest or invest in Bitcoin, like it's just like this speculative thing. I like to like walk people through of like, okay, let's like walk through all the options of like what I could invest in. So like I'll kind of like work my way down like we can get into this later, but whenever you hold on to cash at a bank account, you don't actually own the cash. All it is you just allow the banks to participate more in interest-based lending, because it's not actually like it's you don't actually own that money. It's the bank that actually owns it, but they don't actually own it, because all it is just giving them permission to, or it just gives them the ability to make more interest-based loans. So I tell them like cash isn't something that's totally halal, and even if it was halal, I mean it is, a lot of scholars consider that it is halal. I'm not trying to say whether it's halal or haram, but even if that wasn't an issue, like there's still the inflation issue where fiat currency isn't going to hold its value. So I'll like walk them through. I was like, all right, what am I going to invest in the stock market to be able to preserve my value? I'm not going to I could maybe invest in a lot of these like big tech companies or whatever. But I'd have to make sure that they're like Sharia compliant. I have to make sure they don't, like, even like Apple is involved in allowing people to accrue interest in an account. So like even which Apple is like one of the biggest holdings for a lot of these Sharia compliant ETFs and mutual funds. Just as like an example, so like in the stock market, not only do you have to find what's Sharia compliant, you also have to find out like what's going to be able to perform well in the next 20, 30 years. And I'm not. I guess I should have mentioned this in the beginning, is that I don't come from a finance background. I'm actually an engineer, so like I don't have time to like look and go through all these investment all of these stocks. And so obviously like investing in bonds and stuff is haram. So then all you're left with really is like gold and silver. And then, as you touched upon, Shireen, I mean, that's the biggest problem with gold and silver is that, yes, I can hold it, but like, how am I going to be able to travel with it? And how am I going to be able to store it? So like, as someone who I am a father of four young children, I want to be able to preserve my wealth for the next 40, 50 years. Like that's my time frame. And I can't really do that. Like, how am I going to hold my life savings in physical metal gold? Like, where am I going to save that? Like,
You have to bury it in the backyard.
yeah, exactly. I'd have to do something like bury it in the backyard, and then, if I wanted to move or something, I'd have to, take that with me. And being able to travel across borders is very difficult with that. So, like, I like to walk people through of like, when they're trying to like figure out like why someone would invest in Bitcoin. I like to walk them through like, here are all these other options that are like not very optimal, especially if you're a Muslim. Not only are you trying to beat inflation, you also have to do it in a very Sharia compliant way, which I mean, obviously, that's a benefit for our akhirah, but like that's still something that we have to fight against. And here's this thing that's called Bitcoin, where you have digital scarcity. You have, it's about every 10 minutes a new block gets added. Um, you have a fixed issuance. You have these miners, and you can also more importantly run your own node so that you can kind of enforce the consensus rules. And you can also take hold of you can take custody of your Bitcoin by just memorizing 12 or 24 words, and you can take that with you wherever you want. And no one even has to know that you have like all of your wealth stored in a specific wallet or anything. So like looking at it from this perspective, I mean, there's not Bitcoin is really like the best way to be able to save money. I'm not like this like investor guy or anything. Really, like I said, what I'm trying to do is I work. I have a full time job that I work at, and the money that I get from that job, I want to be able to save it for the next 40 years, so that I can pass it on to my children and grandchildren. And Bitcoin seems to be the only solution that I have.
Quick, a quick question. That's a good, a lot of interesting point that you mentioned. As you know, Muslim in general, we've been like put on the side when it comes to investment, even though we contribute for one of the largest wealth in the world. And because of the leadership of, I would say, New York and London and other stock exchange, we've been kind of, they're not bothering even creating product that will attract Muslims. That's the funny things about it. They take our cash, most of the time free, because a lot of people are willing to put their money in safe country without collecting interest, because they promise not to give them interest. So for them, there's no incentive in the West to just even create Sharia compliance product. They're like, those guys are giving us the money anyway. Park it in a bank, you know. And why do we bother? I think things have to change for sure. And that's why, and we can talk about that later on to how can we move into Web3 and build products that are relevant to our way of life, whether you're Muslim or even a non-Muslim, but want a more sustainable return and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Question also that always come back for laymen is like, who owns Bitcoin? Can you break it down for us? There's a guy behind it, many guys. Is there like somebody can pull up the plug at any time and run? So just for the audience, if you can share some of your
Yeah,
understanding on that.
yeah, for sure. I think that's also another thing that's like really hard to kind of get your head around, is that we're so used to using like centralized systems that like, especially like for our money, which like, a lot of us for my whole time that I've been alive, money has always just been like a centralized thing that banks kind of took care of. But I think one of the things that helps is to kind of look at how Bitcoin started. I think so. You have this anonymous person whose name is Satoshi. He just kind of, he was in part of this cypherpunk mailing list, and he puts out this white paper that's like, hey, there's this new project that's this peer-to-peer digital cash system. And he put out his white paper for other people to read, and then shortly after, he kind of released the code where other people can participate. And people started kind of joining the network. and kind of the network just kind of like grew from there. So I think like what makes it, in short, what makes it decentralized is that each person owns their own or manages their own node. So all the nodes kind of have to come to agreement on, like what the latest state of the I guess of the all the accumulation of the transactions, or I guess like what's called the blockchain. So every person kind of like has their own record of it. Um, but I guess the reason why I brought up the genesis of Bitcoin is because you know in like when we're like in using the internet, we kind of already are using a lot of decentralized protocols, even though we don't know it. Like the TCP IP is like what the internet's based off of, or SMTP for email, and HTTP. Like a lot of these are this protocols. Like they're not there's not like one person that owns the protocol. I like to like look at it as a language. If I start, if I grew up speaking Arabic, and then there's like another tribe somewhere else that starts learning Arabic and starts speaking it, they that kind of like grows that network because people are speaking the same language. And it doesn't mean that any one person owns the Arabic language. It's like kind of like this decentralized consensus of people that kind of agree upon like what the Arabic language is. I think that's also a good analogy in trying to understand what Bitcoin is that it's just essentially a protocol. It's just a protocol that you follow and that you can enforce by running a node, or also mining as well.
Yeah, we like to compare that to the memorization of the Quran, right? So especially if you live in the Middle East, you go pray in the masjid and you pray behind the imam. If he makes like one mistake on one letter, you'll have three people in the front row that will immediately correct him. And that's essentially how a distributed ledger works. You have a bunch of people who've memorized the Quran, so to speak, the ledger. And if anybody tries to introduce any error to it, they will correct you. I think this is easy to grasp for the average Muslim.
Yeah, and I remember hearing that first in when I was listening to that Saifuddin podcast with Haris Harfan. And when he talked about like the memorization of the Quran, that's like when I was like, oh wow, actually that's a very good way to explain how the Bitcoin network works. Is that like each person has their own copy. And like say for example, if all of the copies of the Quran were burned today, like the Quran would still live because people still have that memorized. You still have this global decentralized network of nodes that kind of of the Quran network, if you will. So like I think that's actually a very good analogy. And sometimes that can kind of be like shocking that you would like try to compare it, but you're not like comparing it to like the Quran. You're just kind of comparing how like that network works. And especially when you're trying to explain the immutability of it. Obviously, like the Quran is the ultimate like immutable thing. And but when you're trying to explain how like it's really hard to change Bitcoin because you have this decentralized network of thousands of nodes that all are kind of running this software. And you can't just like there's no central authority that's like going to change or impose a roadmap on Bitcoin that everyone has to follow.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's talk a little bit about fiat currency. You wrote this fascinating article called "How Bitcoin Can Help Muslims Follow the Teachings of the Quran," and you basically break down how fiat is created and how the creation of fiat and the riba system is actually a modern day of serfdom. So, walk us through that.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like whenever people are trying to understand Bitcoin, I think like understanding fiat is a very good place to start because it kind of helps ground you to understand like, if you're trying to understand Bitcoin, you don't really understand the problem, then like it's not going to be all that useful to try to learn about Bitcoin. So I think as I'm learning about Bitcoin, I find myself that I'm learning more and more about fiat, and how riba is completely tied to fiat, and how that affects is like how that kind of affects civilization in general. So I guess just to talk about like fiat in that article, I try to break it down. So you have like different levels or different layers in how fiat operates. So like you have the fiat at the commercial bank, and then you have like fiat at the higher levels of like in like other banking institutions like hedge funds and other financial institutions and stuff, and you have this whole shadow banking industry or whatever, and then like on top of that you have like the central banks, and then like at the very top you have the Federal Reserve. So like at each of these layers, you kind of have different ways that money is created. So a majority of the fiat that's created today is at the commercial bank. So there's whenever you go to a bank and you deposit, say, $100, like I said, that $100 isn't something that's there sitting in the bank. All you're doing is you're enabling the bank to actually create more money. And of course, all of this creation of money is tied to interest.
Let's go a little bit deeper here, because I think it's very important, like you say, to explain how money is created. So what you're saying essentially to me and to us is that when the bank makes a loan, the money isn't actually already there. It just gets created out of thin air, essentially. So most people believe that our deposits at the bank, that's what the bank uses to make loans. Is that not true?
So when you look at the Federal Reserve note, you have to ask yourself like what that note is backing. Now, historically, that note would have would have gold reserves, so that if you wanted to bring that note to a bank, you could actually redeem it for gold. But in the current fiat system, it's things are very different. What's actually backing that note are U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. So basically, like the thing that is in reserve are just liabilities, are just debts, are just interest-based debts. So I think one of the things that's like mind-blowing is that you're trying to like figure out and unravel this thing, like what's backing this dollar, like what's actually underneath all of this. And at the end of the day, you find out it's just U.S. Treasuries. So that's basically just an interest-bearing loan. Whenever like you buy a bond, you buy a certain bond that matures at a certain time, and then you accrue interest on it. So I think that's one of the things that I try to explain to a lot of Muslims that they don't know, is that the money itself that you're using is not only is it just fake, but it literally can only come about through a riba-based loan.
Actually, you made a good point. I was actually listening to a French trader, an ex-French trader who was really, he's an insider actually. Now he's talking a lot with Bitcoiner. He's a French Algerian, very famous. And he was, he was really part of the, a lot of, he lived most of the crisis, So, and, at one point he's kind of quit everything because he noticed that it was like really like a whole scam. And he was saying to the audience that actually the money, there's two types of money. There's the money that we use that is useless, and there's the interbank money. That's the real money. So the bank have access to this interbank money that us as individual, we cannot have access. So we cannot go and trade with this real money, quote unquote, that the bank are still ribawi. But nevertheless, even at the level of at our level, we cannot even have access to this type of currency that is exchanged, and I don't know by what it is backed, but that's what they call it. So when we ask him, can we go and buy, and I want to buy this type of money that the bank is using, this interbank money, he said, no, you have no access to that. So whatever they're giving you, it's not money, this money that you have. So that's one layer of complexity even, to add to the discussion here,
Yeah, exactly. And I think like I'm currently reading Lynn Alden published this book called Broken Money, and I've been kind of going through it, and she kind of makes this point, like she kind of lays it all out, like all of the money that we have today within the banks and the Federal Reserve, they're just claims of claims of claims of claims, and it's just liabilities all the way down. And it really makes you wonder like how, like it just seems like we're in a complete Ponzi scheme, because like the only way to like kind of keep this going is by issuing more money to pay off the old debts, because again, all of it's just based off of liabilities. So the only way to keep those to kind of keep the system of debt is to issue more money to pay off the debt. And what happens is that we have the debt ceiling that just keeps increasing and increasing, and interestingly, the interest keeps increasing on it as well. And that we're not geared toward thinking in exponential functions. But if you look at like the interest that we owe on our debt, it's a very exponential function. You see it like just increasing rapidly. And I think like the interest that we owe on our debt is about, or I don't know if it has reached or is about to reach $1 trillion, just on the interest on the debt, which is absolutely insane.
Yeah, actually, on this note, again, what is interesting is that when people are talking about crypto, in particular Bitcoin, and they bring this, asset class or this method of, being an alternative to the fiat, the biggest challenge with the traditional TradFi who like this concept and this technology turns always around, but how do we continue to loan money? Because imagine their mindset always go back to, we need to loan, continue to loan. Else the economy will collapse. Else nothing will work anymore. So the argument that they have is like, Bitcoin cannot have this characteristic. They're like freaking out. How
Yeah,
can we make so they're like, if you manage to make Bitcoin, a way and a mechanism where we can quote unquote print more to lend, then we're okay with that. And
yeah,
that was funny because this guy could not, he was always turning around. I'm like, why can't you stop spending money you don't have? He said, that's not how the world, so that's not how the world works. And what's funny, as Muslim, alhamdulillah, for most of us, we have kind of this natural, saving mentality. And that's why, most of the Muslim in the West, particularly in the US, are always better off than the average American because they live with what they have for most of them. And they don't go to riba, you know?
yeah,
And that's what riba is killing and destroying life and everything there in the West. And Muslims are more sheltered into that. So how do we
yeah.
go about guiding the other 7 billion human beings who are driven by this concept of loan has to exist?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, a lot of I think the biggest problem is that we've been in fiat for so long. It's hard for us to even think of a monetary system that isn't based on debt or loans. So, like you said, I think like people that are in traditional finance, even whether they be Muslim or not, they look at Bitcoin and they see, for example, that there's no one that's issuing loans, or that it has, especially the thing that really drives them crazy is that it has a fixed supply of 21 million. And to them, it's just like unfathomable. Like, you're going to run a monetary system that has a fixed supply. That means people aren't going to spend, and you're going to crash the economy. But I think like you made a really good point, Murad, is that like just the language or the mindset is completely different when you're in fiat, because in fiat it's you borrow and then you spend. You don't save. Like, that's the thing. Saving is really bad because like for the way our economy is set up and the way we like measure different economic outputs, is that if there's any saving going on, that's bad for the economy, because that means there's not any growth. There's this constant obsession with trying to get like more growth, and it's actually really pernicious, because like um when you're in the system of fiat, you kind of have to change the way you try to look at economic outputs in general, so that whenever you see people that are saving their money, that's inherently a bad thing, because it means that the economy is slowing down. But then all that, and that's like one of the really bad effects about fiat, is that it encourages people to not save. It encourages people to spend, spend, spend. Don't worry about saving. But like you said, we Muslims, we care about saving because we naturally have this low time preference. This is a concept I really like to talk about with people that are kind of like trying to understand Bitcoin, is the concept of time preference. So if you have a low time preference, that means you value the future more than you value the present. But if you have high time preference, that means you're going to value the present and value the future less. So if you're someone that's in fiat, in the fiat system, you're more likely to be high time preference, because your currency is constantly devaluing, so you're incentivized to spend, spend, spend. likewise, if you have low time preference, you're more incentivized to save so that you think about that. So you think about the future. And, it's weird because a lot of Muslims and even scholars have kind of fallen into this trap where they think, saving is this bad thing. Like, obviously, I understand that, like, in the Quran and in the Hadith, it talks about hoarding as being this bad thing and that you shouldn't hoard. But, this is why we have the institution of zakat, so that we can purify our wealth and kind of distribute that wealth to the needy and the people that need it. But, one thing I like to bring up to people that can't fathom this saving mentality is that, especially for Muslims, is that if you don't have savings, you can't pay zakat. Like, it logically follows that if you do not, if Muslim civilization cannot save, it cannot pay zakat. So you need to have savings in order to do that. But the problem with fiat is that it incentivizes you to spend because your currency is constantly devaluing. So you're constantly looking at acquiring other assets that are also rising up in prices. So you're more incentivized to throw your money at stocks that are going to go up in price. You're more incentivized to throw your money at real estate. That is just, it doesn't have to be a smart decision. Just anything will do, because anything will be better than the current fiat money that you're holding.
Yeah,
And
actually, I have a good news for you. They have something that's coming up pretty soon. It's money that expired. So that's a new thing. So be ready.
yeah,
So
and
so look at the date of expiration date. So alhamdulillah, you're gonna have it soon, and that's with the new way of digitalizing this thing.
yeah, like this is like one of the things that, like, naturally, like, that's what fiat will turn into, right? It will turn into what's called a central bank digital currency, and this is something that I also like to tweet about a lot. Is that with a central bank digital currency, it'll allow a certain level of programmability by the central bank, to where, like, if you're not spending as much to boost the economy, well, they can just put an expiration date on it.
Yeah, yeah. That's where
And
that's where we're heading, and people they don't see it, but that's what's gonna happen. We already don't own our money. Okay, literally, if you go to the bank and you ask money, why do you need the money for? I'm
yeah,
like, what? That's my money. Why are you asking me? Especially in France. You
yeah,
withdraw $1,000, the guy freak out. Come back tomorrow. What the hell? Give me my
yeah,
money. I'm sorry for being rude, but that's what's happening. Now they're
yeah,
gonna naturally say, okay, you have until the end of the month to spend your salary, and that's it. And that people are gonna say "Sami'na wa ta'na," and they will follow, and that's
yeah,
it. That's where
yeah,
we're
yeah.
heading. You know?
Yeah. And I think there's definitely this aversion for, like, among the general Muslim population, because they look at, like, Bitcoin as this new thing, and then, like, say there's this scholar or whatever that, may or may not be motivated by trying to keep up the current government or the central banking institution, where, a scholar might just, like, look at, like, Bitcoin and just, like, kind of dismiss it and just say, oh, well, people are speculating on it. It has no intrinsic value. It's not backed by anything. It's haram. And it's just kind of unfortunate because, like, with the way that we're heading toward fiat, it's naturally going to head at some point. Who knows? Only Allah knows, but it's definitely heading towards some kind of some kind of version
Ac-
of a central bank digital
Actually,
currency.
Actually, on the note of the scholars, so the point of the scholar at the time, I mean, the things have changed a lot. So when you will hear some of those quote unquote fatwa, because they just sometime the question was not raised properly. The question was all about seeing this interest, and not interest, but this gambling effect. And it was also, a lot of Muslims, they were taking their entire salary and betting into coins that were not relevant. And it was not even applicable to Bitcoin. It was mostly to the coins that are irrelevant. And they go to the sheikh and they ask questions, especially YouTube sheikh, and they are very quick to make a decision, unfortunately, which is not a benefit. So most of the Kibar al-Ulama, the big scholar, actually never spoke about the Bitcoin. And recently, you see a lot of Kibar, big scholars are actually now speaking about it, and I can share some video of some of the large committee of some of them who are like super like bullish on the Bitcoin, and actually they are speaking about it. I could share some of the yeah. So the thing was like a misunderstanding, and like I said, they were not top scholar. They were just du'at speaking at all this haram, and then when you talk to a brother about Bitcoin, the next things you send you 20 YouTube video of this sheikh said that and say, brother Takillah, and I'm like, okay, khalas.
I think a lot of that also isn't so much that, like if there's, going to be the next, whenever there's like a new fatwa from a scholar that's going to say whether Bitcoin is haram or halal. I mean, even when they do say it's halal, it's never from a sound money perspective. Like, it's never brought up as a solution to the riba problem that we have in fiat. And, I think that dialogue is really lacking and missing. I think, like I understand if a scholar is kind of hesitant to try to like say, all right, Bitcoin is halal, go do what you want, because then, you're going to have idiots that are going to go gamble their life savings and then they're going to lose everything. They're going to go blame the scholar. Well, you said that it was halal, but I think it would really help. At least just I think what I have noticed from my limited perspective is that the dialogue around Bitcoin and sound money and fiat is completely it's just missing. It's lacking. And I think this is one of the reasons why like we started Bitcoin Majlis, is because that conversation is just so lacking whenever I try to like look at any, even when I'm looking at like podcasts or videos from scholars that are talking about it. Even some scholars that are like favorable toward Bitcoin don't really like, I guess, just go very deep into it. They just kind of like, oh, okay, like it's this thing you can invest in, and just make sure you don't gamble on it, and that's it. Like it's never really like analyzed from a sound money perspective or a monetary technology perspective.
Yeah. So exactly. So again, to reiterate, a lot of when you will hear even some of the fatwa came is really to protect the country usually, or the local currency. That it's also some of the things. So we don't say that, hey, they have the reason. Even if some of them, when they block it, they have the reason, but it's not tied to the validity that the fact that Bitcoin is halal. It might be halal, but the problem is that if we let it grow like that and we don't protect our local currency, that could be a problem. So we need to have a proper adjustment in order to be regulated, to be accepted, whatever. So this is, like you say, is never really the risk. That's why I want to go to that question. Okay, this I would say the question that everybody wants to hear and understand. If now we assume, alhamdulillah, that we are using beautiful blockchain technology, it is perfectly halal, and Bitcoin in itself has nothing that show that has haram in it, do we need to create a halal Bitcoin? Because I don't want to mention projects that are coming up at night and day. Do we need to have a? So I would add it. I would add up. Do we need a Ford because a car? Because for me, I look at that in the sense that do we need to have halal cars? In a sense, that's how I simplify it to the Ammi,
Yeah, exactly. So, like, I'm on this podcast, I'm not going to like call out any specific coin or anything.
We don't
we're not going to do that. But just to kind of like answer that question, a lot of I see like some Muslims that kind of like look at Bitcoin and they're like, oh, there's like all of these new products that are being issued on the blockchain and Web3 and all of that, and they look at this and they say, oh, well, we just need to make our own halal Sharia compliant version, and we need to like they just kind of get like lost in trying to issue all of these DeFi products or whatever on like blockchain, trying to like make it Sharia compliant as if like that's like the next thing that needs to be done, without having understood what the actual problem is. So like this is why I spent so much of my effort talking about not just fiat, but just like also like economics and money in general, and especially money as a technology. So like, I think when you look at Bitcoin, I think you have to kind of like look at it and see like what separates it apart from all other like options that you might consider. So like, I know like on this podcast or whatever, like, people are generally like pro crypto, but obviously, if you keep up with my Twitter, I talk a lot about taking a Bitcoin only approach. And I think that kind of like answers a lot of that question, is because when you look at Bitcoin, you have to kind of take into account like everything else that's involved, and not just like a like blockchain or like whatever, like, or proof of work or like the miners or whatever. I think there's you have to look at money as kind of like this emergent phenomenon. So you can't the thing about money is that it always fights for liquidity. So you're not going to be able to have, so if you have like, several monies or whatever, there's always going to be one that's just going to end up like winning in the end. And I think it's important to realize that like what Bitcoin is trying to solve is basically the flaws within money. So like I think a lot of people get obsessed with all of these different utilities, and they get obsessed with yield, which coincidentally is actually not even a utility by definition. But like they'll look at like things like AI or cloud computing, and they try to like look at these esoteric utilities on like the blockchain, with completely missing the whole point of what Bitcoin is trying to solve. Bitcoin is a permissionless, unconfiscatable, high settlement assurance, high integrity assurance monetary protocol, and it has absolute digital scarcity built within it. And you can't like recreate something like that, because you can't like recreate digital scarcity twice. Like if you think about like how Bitcoin came about, I like to think of it more as like a discovery. So you have this whole journey of humanity trying to converge on different types of monies that were more perfect than the previous iteration. And I just see Bitcoin as kind of like this thing that humanity has naturally discovered because of the deficiencies that we have in our fiat system. And when you kind of look at Bitcoin, you have to kind of realize what is Bitcoin trying to solve? It's trying to solve all of the deficiencies that are within the current fiat system. And you can't, there's no point in having other separate monies outside of that. Like if a certain crypto has a certain utility that gives you yield, why would you hold on to that crypto any longer than you needed that one utility, or that one instance where you need yield? You're not going to hang on to it. You're going to hang on to the thing that's going to have the highest integrity assurance, which is going to be Bitcoin. Like, what's the thing that's going to last for the next 40 or 50 years? Is it going to be Bitcoin, or is it going to be like crypto number 12,387? Like it's going to be Bitcoin. And that's the thing I try to like get people to understand, like from my perspective, because I get a lot of like DMs and people messaging me. It's like, you're being so close-minded because you're Bitcoin only. And like I'll try to like explain to them, like, all right, like I know that I can be like very overzealous in my tweets, but the thing that I'm like focused on is that there's this problem of fiat, and there's the riba problem in fiat. And I see only as Bitcoin as the way to solve this. And I see like all of this other stuff that's happening in crypto as just a way to add more financialized layers on top, which is actually what fiat already is. Like that's the thing that I'm just not interested in. I don't see
You-
like how like Web3 or even blockchain itself like solves the riba problem in fiat.
Abdullah, this morning when I wake up and I knew I was going to talk to you, I hesitated between drinking one espresso or two. I think I made a mistake. You're so deep now. I should have drink 3 espresso to get. And I love your passion and mashallah into the topic and where you're driving us. One thing now, I want to talk about the other uh, network that enable project to be built. When we talk about Ethereum network and stuff like that, most of the project that you will see on the net, on the Web3, are built using subtype of Ethereum network. I want you to give us some.
Let me jump in there
Yeah, go ahead.
because
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
this is something that I do care about, and I've thought about it a lot as well. I am a big fan of a Bitcoin only approach, but when we identified the problem which we are currently solving, which involves insurance, we wanted to create a cooperative Sharia compliant insurance, because this is a thing that most Muslims don't have access to today. And you can't actually do this with Bitcoin and keep it decentralized to some extent. So I can use Bitcoin as the underlying asset that backs the treasury, for example, but that would require there's no way to do this in a decentralized way. It will require some centralization. We'll have to control the smart contract on one side, and we'll have to control a treasury of Bitcoin on the other side, and they don't talk to each other because the chains don't talk to each other. So this is where we ended up. We're like, well, I love and I wish that we could build on Bitcoin only, but today that technology just does not permit us to do so. And yet we need to move forward and we need to build alternatives to the fiat system, because otherwise, how do we ever get there to the point where we're like riba free?
Yeah, for sure. I think, so obviously, like I mentioned before, there are all of these other utilities that are like built outside of, because, the thing that Bitcoin is trying to do is just trying to be money. Like it's not trying to earn you yield. It's not trying to like give you credits for cloud computing or whatever the latest utility in blockchain is. Yeah, I think, I, it's not up to me to decide like what people are going to want. Like obviously, like if halal insurance is going to be something that people want. Like, I whenever like people ask me like about that, it's like, oh yeah, I actually know this Takadao thing. If you're interested in like going into crypto or whatever, so like whenever people do want to take that approach, they're more than welcome to like go. I can't make people like not do that, but the point I'm trying to make is that I think like getting back to what the problem that money is trying to solve, or not just what money is trying to solve, but what Bitcoin is trying to solve, is that like the money itself is broken and the riba problem is baked into that money layer. So like with all of these like other cryptos that are doing all their other utilities, like okay, like they might be used, they might not, but in the context of like trying to fix the actual base layer, that like all of these other things get like where basically how we coordinate how we coordinate value and how we coordinate the accumulation of capital, like that is going to be, I think, built on top of like the thing that's the most integrity assured, or the thing that has the highest settlement assurance. I think that's just something that I also like to talk about Bitcoin specifically, is that it has the highest settlement assurance, and that this Bitcoin is solving what all of these deficiencies that we have within fiat. And for right now, like I'm just not seeing like anything interesting in that aspect in any kind of like crypto token or whatever.
Yeah, as a form of money, nothing beats Bitcoin. There's no doubt about that. Okay, we're gonna wrap up now, but I want to give you the last words. So I
Yeah.
think you've made a really strong case for Bitcoin as something that Muslims not only should learn about, but should get into as soon as possible, because this is the only way we're going to free ourselves from the shackles of interest and riba. So, as a Muslim entering the space for the first time, what are some practical steps? What should I do?
Yeah. So the first thing I like to tell Muslims that are interested in Bitcoin is like, first thing, like you need to hit the books. You need to hit podcasts and videos. Like the way that it is now is that like you have to learn about it, because it's a very new emergent technology. Like if someone was in the year 1991 and they were trying to learn about the internet, you just have to sit down and read about it, and because there just wasn't like anything readily available for you to use. So I think the very first thing I encourage Muslims to do is just like pick up a copy of the Bitcoin Standard and just start reading. If this is something that you're interested in, you just have to start reading about it. And especially for and any listeners that are uh, that are interested in Bitcoin or wanting to take a Bitcoin only approach, please contact me. You can contact me on Twitter. We also have bitcoinmajlis.org. You can come visit our website. And if you are if you see the riba problem within fiat as a big issue, then I highly encourage you to actually learn about Bitcoin and see if that's something that will inshallah maybe one day break us out of this fiat debt slavery that we live in.
Inshallah, bidnillah. Thank you so much for this. This has been extremely interesting, thought provoking, and we appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Abdullah. And I think there's so much we could benefit from your discussion, and I think that you deserve to have the right to come back a second time to really deep dive even more. And this time I'll be ready, my friend.